morning. Here we are. Oh, let me start that again. I can't speak. So good morning. We are here again, this time with Stephen Hall, who is a PhD student at the University of Bolton in psychology. How are you this morning?
Good, thank you. Yourself?
I'm really well, thank you.
Okay.
Although, tell me if that window gets too bright. It looks like it's shining off the mirror. I have like a halo around me.
Yeah, that's okay.
Got divine intervention today. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me today. And as you know, we are doing a series of interviews with academics and students regarding their educational journeys. And today you've agreed to talk to me about yours. And I understand you've had quite a lengthy educational journey over your life.
Yep.
So if you don't mind,
I won't tell you how old I am, but I should be.
a quick overview in the time that we've got.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, if you would just outline to me what your educational journey has been and how has it been?
Okay. Right. So if you want to start from high school, so I was at a grammar school in south of Birmingham in the 60s.
Wow.
I left
you look
school.
Older than 21.
I'm older than 21, but older than 21 3 times over. So I was in just south of Birmingham. I was in high school, did A levels, or did O levels in 1968. I did my A levels in 1970. I went to university in 1970. I was at Cambridge doing maths. Did 3 years there, and then I went to Liverpool to do a master's in theoretical physics. And then I stayed on doing a PhD there as well, which I took in 1976 when I also got married. I toyed with the idea of going into academia, but the late 70s wasn't a good time to do that. It was all there with Thatcherism was beginning to rear its ugly head and cuts and all sorts of stuff. So it was a very uncertain time, and just having got married and starting a family, it just wasn't. It didn't seem a very sensible thing to do. So I left academia and got a job working for what was then called the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority, and actually stayed with them really until 2001. They were privatized in the middle, but so the name changed, but it was basically the same group. And then the bit I was in got sold, and I stayed there for 8 months. Then in 2002, I started in business on my own, again doing nuclear safety, and then got made redundant in 2019. The project I was on got pulled, and during the latter part of that, from about 2005 onwards, I was working with a counselling organisation which we set up in Lee as one of the directors, and I did quite a bit of support for people with bereavements and some bereavement counselling. But I became increasingly interested in trauma, and so I wanted to do work on trauma. So when I got made redundant, I started looking at how I could do some more training. So first of all, I did a level 4 in psychology, and then actually through one of my wife's clients, we found out about this course, the psychology conversion course at Bolton. Right. And in fact, this client and I were both on it, so she dropped out in there, but I saw it through to the end. Finished in December. Well, yeah, December last year we finished finally, and then I started doing a PhD, which is what I'm doing now. So that's the overview, if you like, of the whole thing from the 60s to the 2020s.
So let me get this right. You're doing your second PhD.
Doing my second PhD, yes.
What is wrong with you?
I keep saying you can't have too many PhDs.
I'm doing my first PhD. It's the hardest thing I've ever done.
But I'm not sure it's easier or not the second time around. It's different the second time around, certainly.
Well, I mean, the first time was in the 70s. It's a bit of a time difference.
Yeah, it's 50 years pretty much.
Well, I didn't want to put a number on it, but yeah, you're right. I mean, from that point of view, how you must have seen a huge difference in education, how it's delivered, how it's responded to.
Yeah, I guess so. And I was just trying to think what the differences were being a PhD student the first time around and doing it now. I mean, the biggest difference is obviously technology. That's a massive difference. I mean, my first thesis I did on a typewriter.
Wow.
And all the equations written in by hand with a fountain pen, because you couldn't type them. So it's got Tipex a lot in my PhD thesis. It wasn't very long. It has 53 references, whereas an average essay on my MSc course has over 70.
Yeah, very different.
Just because it was just hard, and getting a reference was hard work. I mean, just to tell you how I used to do, when I first started my PhD in 1973, 1974, my supervisor gave me a paper that he'd written as a starting point. And what I did, I looked through the references, and then I wanted to get some of those references then to start building a chain of references. So what I had to do is I had to walk across the campus to the library. For each of the references I wanted, I had to fill in a multi-part chit by hand and then give them in. And then they would then send them off to the British Indian Library at Boston Spa. And then a week later, I'd get a phone call or a message saying that these were in. I'd walk back across to the library, pick up these photocopies, take them back, and then repeat the process.
Oh, wow.
Right. So that process, which used to take me a week, I can now do in about 5 seconds. Yeah. And the other thing was that when you went across the library with your list of references you wanted, they always tried to beat you down to have less because they had to pay for them. So so they're always trying to say, do you really need all of these sort of things? So it was so that's one impact of just how you actually did research is different.
Yeah,
I think in terms of the departments, obviously my supervisor, I called him by his first name, but everybody else was Dr. this or Professor that.
Where did you get your PhD from the first time?
Liverpool, sorry.
Liverpool. So because you went to Cambridge for your degree.
Yeah.
And then Liverpool for your masters and for your PhD.
Yeah. I did the masters first because in my college there were only 8 of us did maths, and all the other 7 got firsts, and I didn't. So there's the chance possibly staying on and doing PhD was 0. So I looked around and there's this tool. It was a dissertation by exam and dissertation, and so I did that, and then I just carried on the same piece of work to do a PhD.
Yeah, okay.
So that's how it all worked. So technology is probably the biggest change, but socially things are different as well in terms of formality. So formality in the department was much greater, but formality of the experience was a lot less. So now we have to do an R1 and an R2 and all that sort of stuff. There was none of that. You just agreed with your supervisor what you're going to do. You did it. And then the viva was just you, your supervisor, and an external examiner sitting in an office. Right. So all that was a lot less formal, whereas the relationships were more formal. So it's interesting how things have changed.
Yeah, very much so. So thinking about you back in high school, and you said you went to a grammar school. Did you know you were always going to go to university? Was education really important to you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was assumed that I would go to university.
Assumed? So what did you actually think? Did you want to?
Yeah, I think so. I was the first member of my family to go to university.
And what's a university to go to?
Sorry?
And what a university to go to?
Yeah, but that was because I think both of my parents would have gone to university had the Second World War not happened. Because remember, I was born 6 years after the war ended. Right. So things are still. I mean, I still have a ration card somewhere that I had when I was a child. So that's the sort of period I was born in.
Yeah. Very difficult time.
So they missed out, and so there were sort of parents who wanted to make sure that I had what they weren't able to have. And so I think it was always assumed that they wouldn't. And I was academically able, so I think the members of my teachers always assumed that too. So it was never really questioned. And I was academic. I was very interested in learning. I was a bit of a geek. So that was a pathway that was really almost preordained, I guess. That's what I'd do.
How did you find studying for your degree?
I think if I look back, I regret some things actually, because basically I enjoyed university so much that I didn't actually do a lot of work. Which is why I didn't get a first, but everybody else did.
What did you get?
I got in maths. It was halfway down it didn't divide a second, so it was just on the borderline between a 2-2 and a 2-1. So I was exactly halfway down the classes though. So what they used to do is they used to put everybody in order. The top quarter got a first, the bottom quarter got a third, and the rest got a second. And I was exactly halfway down the list. So so I'm on the borderline 2-1, 2-2. Yeah. But I could have done a lot better.
You could
if
have
I'd done
done.
a bit more work.
But you enjoyed yourself.
I enjoyed myself immensely. Yes, it's
Did you
great.
socialise? Is that what you're
Yeah,
talking about?
socialising. No, it was just a nice place to be. Interesting talking to people, and we go around and talking till 2 o'clock in the morning every morning, drink a coffee, and staggering out of bed for lectures at 9, and that sort of stuff. So
I bet that was a very different university experience in comparison to Bolton.
probably yes. I mean, actually being in the same town for something. I don't live in Bolton. I commute in every day when I come in. So yes, it's. I think relationships is harder because obviously because I'm not being on campus. Also, I'm a lot older anyway, so I can't imagine I couldn't be in the hall of residence these days, could I? Not really.
Well, you could. It could
Because
be
I
very
could,
different.
yeah. The wife might object.
Maybe not, though.
Well, maybe not. Yes.
You never know. So you left Cambridge, and so because of your results, you went to Liverpool. That's why you looked elsewhere.
Well, yes, that's right. Yeah.
Right. How come you chose Liverpool?
It was a bit of an accident, really. It's just finding something which I wanted to do, which was suitable to me, and which would accept me. So I just applied, and they accepted me. So I went. So that's basically it. Yeah.
And it was physics, did I hear you say?
Theoretical physics, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Some really easy subjects then.
Yeah. Well. If you've done maths all the time, yes, it is.
Yeah.
Because and in fact, the exam I took for the MSc, I did really well in, because basically I'd done it all in my first degree.
Wow.
So it was a bit of, it wasn't easy, but it was easy because of where I was. It wasn't all that difficult. So the dissertation was the interesting part of that, really.
And then you stayed on and did your PhD there.
Yeah.
What was your PhD?
It was in again in theoretical physics. It was a fairly obscure part of, well, it was to do with elementary particles, spin 3/2 particles.
I'm nodding like I know what you're talking about.
I'll show my PhD.
I would love that. I'll just keep nodding like, yes, I know what you're talking about. I understand that.
Yeah, this is it.
Look at that! Some problems in the theory of spin. Wow.
But just to show the inside, and you see it's all typewritten, and then so all the equations written in by hand.
Look at that.
That's
completely different.
Completely different, yeah.
What happens when you type and if you make a mistake? Do you have to do the page again?
Well, it depends how big the mistake is. Usually what you do is use Tipp-Ex. You don't know what Tipp-Ex is?
Yes.
There's a little bottle about this big and a little brush in it. It's like nail varnish, but white. Yeah. Like, imagine white nail varnish. Yeah, it's like imagine white nail varnish. And then you used to write that over, then type over it again. And probably if you can find an example, there's one on the last page. I'm going to find one now, but yeah, it's a bit of a mess. And then if you miss a word out, you can either retype the page or you just write it in hand and put an insert mark. We've done that a couple of times as well. Because there's lots of effort in retyping a page of thesis, especially if you're not a very good typist. I'm still a 2-finger typist even now.
To be fair, I am. I'm quite a fast 2-finger typist, but
yeah,
they don't teach that anymore. We were talking about that the other day with somebody. Yeah. When I was in school, they still had like your secretarial courses.
Yeah.
So they would try and teach me how to type, because you have to put your fingers on the middle wall, haven't you?
On the home keys, yeah.
Yeah, that's it, the home keys. Oh gosh, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
I know where they are because on my keyboard here there's 2 little blips on them, so you can feel where they are. The J and the F.
Oh, yeah, mine hasn't got it. That's a very interesting diversion, that.
So I had a second. My father worked in a company, so they gave me an old broken electric typewriter, which I fettled and got working and used that. So.
Is that easier?
Oh, electric, yes, much easier. You haven't got to hit the keys so hard, and it's because I think you get repetitive strain injury from a typewriter. So it's hard work. But this one's easier. Yeah.
Anything to make your life easier. It's hard, isn't it? It's hard to imagine. Because I think, well, when was I born? I was born in 1979. You'd finished your first PhD by then.
Yeah.
But
got 2 children by then.
Oh, bless you. Yeah. So I think I've always had computers.
Yeah.
Not great computers. I mean, my first computer was a Commodore 64, but
I think I've heard of all those.
I don't think I remember a time with a typewriter. They were around for definite, because I know my grandma and granddad used to still have one.
Yeah.
But I've always had, I guess, the luxury of
Mm.
technology starting.
Yeah. Electronic calculator just come out. So while I was at university, a simple 4-function calculator, no one just as at time loss, dropped below £100 while I was at university.
Wow.
And they give them away free stamp with it for advertising now, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Just look at what our phones can give us.
Yeah.
We can do anything on these things.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that, I mean, when you said the biggest difference is technology, you're not wrong, really, are you?
No, that's a
huge difference.
Yeah. I think, as I said, social things have changed and expectations have changed. I think the number of universities has changed. I mean, there's probably more than doubled. I mean, Bolton wasn't a university in those days.
No.
Liverpool only had one. There's 3 now.
I suppose.
Yeah.
So what do you think of the current conversations where people talk about how education today is easier than it was?
I don't know. I think it's different, isn't it? It's I know people of my generation tend to sort of talk about falling standards and things, and maybe that's true. I think that it's, again, looking at what in maths, what we did in maths at what's now GCSE, you now do at A level, a lot of it. So that is different. But that's because I think obviously we did O levels rather than GCSE, but you could do O levels, you could do CSEs, I think, in those days, which was a much lower thing, but that's all been combined. So yeah, I don't know whether it's easier or not. I think that I think kids in education find life more difficult. And I think, again, because of the social things, social media, didn't know that either. So I think that makes life more difficult. So I think it's just very different.
Yeah. Yeah, very different.
I think we lived in a simpler, more naive age when I was at school. So
I feel like we question things more now. I feel like everything's an argument now, whereas certainly when I grew up in the 80s, it was because you were told it was, and that was it.
Yeah.
Now we say why all the time. You know, I think about my relationship with my son, and I want to develop that kind of critical thinking and questioning things, but at times it's frustrating. I just want him to wash up. Don't ask me why.
No.
Yeah, I do. I feel like we perhaps ask too many questions now. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing. I think you should question things. You certainly shouldn't accept everything you're told.
I was always told when I went into the police, accept nothing, believe no one, check everything. ABC.
Yeah, I think that's a good philosophy.
Right, so now then, you've done 2 masters and you're on your 2nd PhD. That just blows my mind. I love it. I love it. How is your masters in comparison to your first one?
The main difference in the first one was by examination as well. So it was a bit like an undergraduate. So I had to do several papers, which were like undergraduate papers, but slightly harder. And then a dissertation. Whereas in this masters, it was by essays and dissertation. So it was probably more similar. I don't think it's much. It's hard to compare because one was in maths and one was in psychology, so they're quite different subjects and a different approach. I thoroughly enjoyed the Masters degree. I had a ball. It was one of the best things I've done, I think, educationally.
Really?
And certainly as a retired person, I mean, I don't know what your view of what your plans for your retirement are. It's probably a bit early yet, but you should be thinking about getting your pension and things. As I always said, if you see me sitting playing dominoes, you have my permission to shoot me.
Why?
So, I just can't imagine anything worse than the traditional things that people do in retirement now, going to clubs and playing dominoes and playing golf. You know, oh, goodness.
No, I know what you mean. I think my view on things has changed. I think when I was in the police, I had that type of vision for my retirement. I think it was going to be just chilling out and just kind of going to book clubs and going on walking groups or something. Whereas now, being in education, I'm just hungry for education constantly. I want to keep reading and keep learning and having different conversations and expanding kind of my knowledge and my views on things.
Yeah.
I don't think I really did that before. I think, I don't know if it was me or just the police service, but it was very much black and white. This is
Yeah.
what it is. Whereas
Yeah.
now the world's just this beautiful
Yes.
colour. Although
Yeah.
you wouldn't think that today. I'm very dark today.
It's very, very,
Everything's
very black and white.
grey.
Yeah. But my game plan was that I was involved in this project, which was to do with building a new nuclear power station, and I actually worked for Hitachi, the Japanese company,
Okay.
which was fascinating in its own right from an educational point of view as well. But my game plan was to see that through to the end. So basically, if that had happened, I'd have still been working when I was in my mid-70s.
Wow.
And of course, you can do that now, which you couldn't do. But when I joined the Atomic Energy Authority, my retirement age was 60, and I eventually retired when I was 67. So I managed to go a bit longer than that, and I would have stayed on until I was 75, 75, 76, 77 if that had been possible. Just because I enjoyed working with people, I enjoyed the intellectual stimulation of doing a technical subject and having to find solutions to technical problems. I've always enjoyed that. And
it's far more accessible when you're these days, like this. So a lot of jobs and a lot of things that you want to do, you can do because of technology. Whereas before, you might not have wanted to go to an office or to have to go and visit people face to face, whereas now you can.
Yeah.
I think it gives you a bigger outlook.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And also working online, because before I worked for the Japanese, I worked for the Americans. And so really from probably the early part of this century, put it that way, I've worked online because using video conferencing, because you couldn't have face-to-face meetings with somebody who's in Pittsburgh or Tokyo, and so you did online.
You could just be a jet setter.
Well, I did that, but I did used to travel quite a lot as well. But even so, you still couldn't do everything that way.
No.
I mean, I started working for Hitachi in 2013, and I stopped in 2019, and I went to Japan 24 times in that time, so I did go a lot. So that was nice. That was fun to do that, and had good friends who live there now. And but it was learning. So even then, you see, what I started doing, I started taking Japanese lessons because I just like learning things. Yeah. I learned to speak Russian in my 40s, and I learned to try to but Japanese in my 60s was just a step too far, so I didn't really get on that much. So
you just threw that little nugget in there, then just learn Russian.
Yeah, I did, because I go to Russia a lot, so I went 50 times in the 80s and 90s. So I just took the opportunity of traveling and being there a lot to learn the language. Okay, I'd forgotten a lot of it, but I was able to speak. I was able to get by. Whereas Japanese, I could do restaurants, but that was it, and I've forgotten all that now. Yeah, I just like learning things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I feel now. I feel like there's just not enough time to learn. I just want to learn all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, so what's your next plan then? What else are you going to do?
Well, I'm going to finish this PhD, which on the current I'm part-time, so I think I'm supposed to finish when I'm 77. I may not. I may decide to go full-time or something to try and quicken it up a bit, but I can't really imagine. Maybe I will, and maybe I'll do something else after that. Maybe I'll do a PhD in Chinese art or something. No, I can't imagine.
Just choose something really different.
Really random, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't think that would do, because I think I'm a scientist at heart. I mean, I've always liked science. I love science at school. I did a PhD in physics, and I worked as an engineer doing physics and engineering for all those years. And now I'm doing scientific subjects. I can't imagine doing. I suppose I could, but it's not really. I just love the scientific approach, like technology. That's what I do. I'm still a geek. I mean, I was a geek when I was 10. I'm a geek now. So.
Is that how you classify yourself? Yeah, hello, I'm Stephen. I'm a geek.
Yeah.
What is a geek? I love it. I think I'm a geek now.
Who defined it? Who was it said that? I heard this quote on a YouTube video. My eldest son was watching a program about the development of personal computers, and somebody said, and I forget who it was. It said a geek is somebody who uses a telephone to talk about telephones. That was quite an old definition, but
yeah, how would you make that relevant today?
Yes, somebody talks about computers online, I think.
Yeah, on a Zoom call or something.
Yeah. It's where technology isn't the means, it's the end, or probably both, actually. I think for a geek it has to be both. It's the means and the end.
Means and the end. Yeah, I guess so. Oh, that takes some thinking.
Yeah.
Now you've just thrown something else at me I need to start thinking about more.
Sorry.
No, I like it. I like it. Now I know from other conversations as well, you've taken some other courses, haven't you? So you're not just doing, or you haven't just done your PhD and your masters. You've taken some extra learning.
Yeah, I qualified as as an EMDR therapist over the last, well, mainly during lockdown, because of working in the counselling organisation, so I can actually address some of the trauma issues, and that's been really quite eye-opening as well. It's a privilege actually for people to let you talk to them about that sort of thing and actually help them. That's been really good.
What was it that made you interested in this area of trauma?
I don't know really. I think it's just something that came up in what we were doing as a counselling organisation, and it was an issue that was not being resolved, or something that we couldn't resolve, and also wasn't being resolved locally in the NHS either. Really, so many people were being passed on to us for bereavement counselling, where really the issue was trauma.
Yeah. Trauma is just not recognized.
Or the combination of the things, or that the bereavement was traumatic, which often it is. Or the bereavement was made. The thing about bereavement is that everyone suffers from bereavement sometime in their life, and most people cope with it. Okay, maybe some better than others, but when you talk about complicated grief or unresolved grief, it's sometimes called, it's in DSM-5 now as something to be looked at. Isn't actually, there are some sort of draft diagnostic criteria in DSM-5. It's not really fully recognised. But people who need help with bereavement, it's usually because there's something else. Either there's been a lot of bereavements, that they've just lost their dad, but they lost their cousin the year before, and then the brother the week before that, all sort of stuff. So you get that sort of continual grief, makes it complicated. Or because the nature of the death itself, or the nature of the experience itself, it often is somebody's been murdered or committed suicide. That's traumatic. And so there's always something underneath it if somebody needs real help with bereavement, and that's where it's interesting as well, but it's also, so it's a privilege to be able to go back with somebody and actually work out why that is, and actually bring them some understanding and some relief from those problems as well. So that's really why. And I said before, sorry, Karen.
I was going to say, it's really interesting that you say that, because one of the biggest movements within trauma-informed practice is that we don't ask enough questions. Certainly within the medical professional. So if you go to your doctors, because that tends to be the first port of call, doesn't it? When anybody feels bad, you go to your doctors, and they don't ask enough questions. They just either throw pills at you or pinpoint the most immediate issue, i.e. a death. So it must be, you've got an issue with bereavement, off you trot. When that's the reality. If we asked more questions and really got to know that person, you would highlight, or at least find out, it might not be that death, it might be that it's triggered something that happened before. And that's the practice that we all need to start moving towards, more trauma-informed, and just to ask questions and not just see what's in front of you.
But also, the reasons why grief can be particularly, not traumatic, but particularly difficult, can be because it's traumatic, but it's often to do with the relationship with the person who's died. And ironically, it's not necessarily, if the relationship was good, so you've lost a beloved father, that's difficult, but you get over it. Where the real problem arises if you lose a father who was a so-and-so. Yeah.
Because you never resolve that.
Exactly, because now the opportunity to resolve it is gone.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you haven't just lost the person, you lost all of that and all of the future that might have made possible.
Yeah.
So, and then obviously there's all these different things and sometimes more than one, of course, as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But we were getting people. What happened was the local mental health team started referring people to us, and basically they do it if there was any bereavement in the case, they'd often refer them to, because they could get them off their caseload then, say they could pass them on. Then it became almost anything to do with death. So even if it wasn't bereavements per se. So I got a lad, for example, who was involved in a car accident on the M62 when someone died and he was driving. And he wasn't responsible, but he felt responsible. So that was like a traumatic thing. And then they suddenly realized actually they started passing trauma people onto us as well. And we're able to deal with them to a certain extent. We don't do CBT, we only do person-centered counselling. So it seemed that there was really a need that we could address if we had somebody who could do trauma therapy. So I've trained as the MDR. My wife's doing it now as well. So we have two MDR therapists in the team.
Oh,
just
it's definitely a needed service.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah. But I think also that I think I said before we started talking on video and on recording, is that we've always been involved with. We've always been a member of a church locally as well, and because of that sort of compassionate outlook on people and all, that's really part of the driving force as well. That wanting to not just pat people on the head, but actually do something real to try and help them. So that's part of the motivation, at least. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think we need more research into trauma. We need to understand it more. We need to understand what we need to do with people in trauma, not just throw pills at them.
No, and that tends to be what happens. And because the NHS, I mean, as you said, that trauma is everywhere. And one of the things, if you start doing EMDR therapy, is that the people you work with, the EMDR therapists who teach you, they see trauma in everything, because it is everywhere. It's almost every sort of emotional or mental issue probably has trauma somewhere in it.
Yeah.
So that, and also I think I said at the beginning that the reason my PhD thesis is on trauma and memory, because of it's often memory that's the issue, either because you can't remember things to do with a traumatic event, or more probably because things keep coming up, things get triggered, and you have memories you don't want, and you can't forget them, and you can't, and they're intrusive, and they're almost they can become life controlling.
Yeah.
And it's looking at how trauma affects memory formation. That's really what I'm interested in. So that's what my PhD thesis is on that.
That's really interesting. I have a real traumatic response to my doorbell every time my doorbell goes, and that's clearly because I'm remembering things and associating it with bad stuff that happened.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah, but we all have these events, and it's a scale as well, isn't it? It's something which is traumatic may not actually be all that bad in some. No.
Yeah, but how can you quantify bad?
And it depends how old you are as well. And so if you something which is you could just brush off as an adult is really life changing if you're 5. And so there's all that sort of stuff, and so looking at how childhood experiences affect things as well. Is also that's part of what we do in psychology, isn't looking at development, and that the development can be changed and can be stopped or can be modified by events that happen.
Yeah.
And things like it even can become things like dissociative identity disorder is almost certainly caused by childhood trauma. Basically, the development gets stopped in various places, and the person's got the adult personality, but also a bit of child personality, which is left locked in there somewhere.
See, this is again though where when you start getting into personality disorders, I'm not on that bus, because I do think a lot of it is rooted in trauma. And if we'd have asked those questions of those people and truly got to the bottom of what they were experiencing, we wouldn't need to label them with some kind of disorder.
No, probably. I think you're right. Yes, I think trauma is the key.
You look at borderline personality disorder, and you look at how women are disproportionately labelled as BPD, and you look at the history of BPD, and it's hysterical women, it's hysteria.
Yeah.
Well, it's I don't know. The more I read about it, the more you pick apart, and you just think, gosh, if we'd have do we need all these labels and ticks? How about we just talk to the person and genuinely talk to them find out what the issues are, and would we ever need to label them? And
Possibly not. Yeah.
all pills, yeah.
Yeah.
I do think there's a place for medication, because I needed that period of time when I had sertraline. I definitely needed it because I needed to get through what I was in. And if I hadn't have had that period of time, I don't really know where I'd be.
No.
But then it's not a life choice. It's not something that I'm going to be on. But it's not like I'm a diabetic and I need that medication. It was just something that I needed to work through and get to the next stage. You know, for me, it's like having pain relief because I've hurt my shoulder. Once it doesn't hurt anymore, you need to stop taking the pain relief.
Yeah, but to treat somebody from the effects of trauma, you have to stabilize them, and you can stabilize them through mindfulness or through other techniques like that, but also medication as a placement is very severe. So you need to use all the tools that you've got in your toolbox to get them to the point where you can actually start addressing that traumatic experience, all those traumatic experiences.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely.
But but I think it's sort of thing you can go off in many directions that you really got. I think the thing about doing a PhD is it forces you to restrict what you're looking at.
Yes, of course.
At least you might then make some progress, but if you try and go everywhere, you'd end up doing nothing, would you?
Exactly. Yeah.
And however interesting it is, you've got to discipline yourself. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you do. Well, it's been really interesting talking to you. I can't believe you're on the second PhD path. Honestly, I'm in awe of you. I'm absolutely in awe of you. I don't know. Every day I can't believe I'm doing one, let alone coming back and doing another.
Well, it beats playing dominoes.
I'm going to challenge you to a game of dominoes. Next time we can get on campus, we are going to play dominoes in the Costa. Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks, Lindsay.
I hope to see you soon.
Yes, we'll see you around when we eventually get back in. When I find out which room we're supposed to be in.
Exactly. I'll just press